So without any further ado, let's a few introductions. We'll go with well, we've got an excellent three expert panel. So we'll start with Chris Scott, if I may. Chris had a really successful career playing county cricket as a wicketkeeper batsman for Notts and Durham. Chris then transferred his playing career to a coaching career, and for 20 years or so has been head coach at Cambridge University cricket, as well as helping the region of East developing young players. So some really good insight around recruiting from 17, but also the work he does with 18 to 18 to 21 years, plus or minus a few mature players. Donovan Miller. Donovan started playing his cricket in and around East London, played for Woodford Wells, also played for Gidea Park and Romford in Essex. Donovan was our lead coach for one of our Chance to Shine programs in Waltham Forest. And then since then, he became the head coach for the Chris Girl Academy and has gone on to do some genuine greatness. He's worked along with the England and Essex men's team, and in the last 5 years has been either head coach or assistant coach for a number of global T20 franchises, including the IPL, the PSL, the Bangladesh Premier League, GT20, CPL, MSL, and also the Big Bash. So much insight to get from Donny, both for him as a sort of coach working with 15 to 8-year-olds in the street program, but also as a head and assistant coach in a performance environment, instant results performance environment with young players and also expert. And finally, probably doesn't, like other two, doesn't need an introduction, but I've had great fun finding this, so I'm going to do it anyway, is Graham Gooch. Graham, who is in England and Essex cricket legend, 118 tests, 8,900 test runs. My favourite stat on Graham was he's actually played over 1,400 professional games, which is a mammoth effort. Graham also Graham also holds the highest cumulative test score of, I'm not going to tell you what that is because that comes up in so many virtual quizzes, but good to Google and put in the old knowledge bank. But after an illustrious career captaining both England and Essex, Graham converted his career into becoming a coach, both again working both with England and with Essex, and recently converted all of that and becoming a batting consultant, again with England as well as with Essex, so working with the young Alistair Cooks and Ravi Baparas and Tom Westleys and Varun Chopras of the world, as well at the same time working more established England players in that same period. It's fair to say Graham's philosophy was seen as pioneering of the time, and now is seen as common practice amongst the industry. So again, really interested to tap into Graham's knowledge. That actually, probably Graham, I'll go on to you first. I've got a bit of a leg stump half volley, as I like to call it, just an easy question to throw out. But your sort of experience of a young 17-year-old walking out the pavilion at Valentine's Park, learning to become a professional cricketer for Essex. How has the coaching changed, if you like, for a young kid from your when you were 17 to now, or recently when you were batting consultant with the ECB?
Well, I think going way back, trying to remember. Firstly, when I first started professional cricket with Essex, I played a year as an amateur because I was still doing an engineering apprenticeship, and Essex didn't really have a full-time coach, you know. So what you did, you learned off of the senior players, and if you were brave enough and smart enough, you asked them about things in the game. You listened to other players on other sides. So it was really self-taught. But I was very lucky. Just prior to that, my father, I was born in Leighton and lived in Leytonstone. I played for the team that he played for, East Ham Corinthians, and we played at Barkingside, a ground you probably know, the old Blues rugby football club. We played there. And then I was going to play for Walthamstow, having played for Waltham Forest. And I was introduced to Bill Morris, who I don't know if he was around when you was around, Arfan, but he was the coach at the Ilford Cricket School, ex-Essex player, played a little bit in the 50s, and he was my formative sort of influence as a coach. So that was basically in the off season. I didn't really have much coaching from him in the cricket season. So nowadays, you know, with the amount of support players get, I think he's excellent, and they get advice. But my sort of, quickly, because I obviously like to listen to the other guys as well, and I don't want to sort of hog the show. My philosophy on the coaching is that a coach, a mentor, an advisor is there to give you ideas. He's there to give you options. He's to give you suggestions of what will improve you, both technically, physically, the way you think about yourself, every aspect that goes towards making you a better performer. And it's not the coach's job to play for the performer. It's his job to give him the ideas, and the player has to make up his own mind of how he wants to go forward. You know, I can do this, I might not be able to do that. It's not that all the information that you get from one person or even a lot of different people is not correct. It's all probably given in good faith, but not everything suits everybody. So the player or performer's job is to decide, you know, what works for him and what doesn't. And that's, I think, the role of the coach. A good coach is to help push people in a direction or shape them, but they don't make the final decision. And I was very lucky that Bill Morris was a coach like that. And then I think added to the fact when I started that there was no formal coach. You had to sort of pick it up yourself, which was no bad thing, actually, because you had to think, you know. And when people ask me now, just quickly, what's the most important thing a coach can give a player? Teach them to think for themselves. Because when you cross the white line, you are on your own.
Brilliant. Thanks, Graham. I'm going to come back to you in a minute because I'm going to tap into a bit more of that. That's brilliant. Chris, I'm going to go over to you, sir. Obviously, as head coach at Cambridge University, one of the most university cricket programs, one of the most successful. You know, I suppose you have a double role. One is around the concept of recruitment, and then the other one is when you have 18 to 21-year-olds mainly. I suppose my question for you is, how do you recruit them? And then when you've got them in-house, how do you work with them? How do you develop them? How do you grow them?
Well, in terms of recruitment, my centre, MCCU centre, is Cambridge University and Anglia Ruskin University. They're quite different in terms of recruitment. Cambridge University, I don't really have any influence on recruitment. They have to fulfil their academic criteria. And ARU, I have a little bit more flexibility. In the early days when I was trying to get this off the ground 20 years ago, time you mentioned, I did tend to recruit quite hard, sell the cricket programme, and I got myself a really good squad of players. But at the same time, on occasions, not everybody, they were losing sight of the fact that they were coming to university, and instead of some are just saying this is the cricket programme. So in terms of recruitment, I tend to go on leads and speak to parents and make sure that they come into university for the right reason. They come to ARU because of the cricket programme, but they come really to get a degree at the end of it for the rest of their life. But I mean, once I get them here, going back to Graham's points, is that they're at an age where they go from teacher to pupil, where everything is sort of structured for them, where they have to then become more of a partnership, adult to adult, and trying to get a player to take personal responsibility for their development, and to try and guide them and give them as much of a platform as they can for that to happen. I get players, particularly at Anglia Ruskin, that have they've played for the county under 13s, under 15s, under 17s, and they've not quite gone to that next level. The county's not taken them on. So when they arrive at university, quite often they can be a bit angry of why they've not been taken on. But I'm lucky in the fact that I've got the whole, when they arrive in October, I've got the whole of that month to get to know the player and try and build up a relationship before we go into the programme. And so what I look for in a player is to become a little less maintenance, lower maintenance, and start to discuss things with me rather than having me telling them things. And the small point really, I think when a player now gets to 18 or 19, I'm looking for them talking about their own personal responsibility. I'm looking for their kit bag now to have in it, rather than 6 different pairs of gloves that Steve Smith might have, is to have a foam roller, to have a TheraBand, to have a baseball mitt, to have a sidearm, to have a bag of their own throwdown balls, and for the bowlers to have 2 balls that they can bowl with if there aren't any there that are good enough. I don't care where they got them from. I won't ask any questions, because I tend to have players drop in every hour, every 2 hours to fit into their timetable, and I want them to be prepared for when we go into whatever we're working on that day. And the difference at that age as well is that you allow it to go. You have a theme, you have a little bit of a structure, but you allow it to go where the player wants it to go, and the more where you perhaps think they should be working on.
Brilliant, Chris. I'm going to definitely tap on a few things there that I've jotted down. And Donny, we're going to go to you. Really want to focus your early days as Chancellor leading Forest for the street programme, and you had that brilliant transition of players who mainly played tape ball, tennis ball, cricket. I suppose the first thing is maybe explain for the audience what is tape ball cricket, and secondly, how did you work on that transition to help develop them when they started to have a bit more ambition and aspiration, those 15 to sort of 17-year-olds?
So obviously, tape ball cricket is just basically a tennis ball wrapped in a electrical tape, and you can do all sort of stuff with the tape ball and the tennis ball. Make it swing, make it seam. So great way to train without having any pains or getting hit by a cricket ball. But as you said, Arfan, it's slightly different from Chris, who says that the kids is coming in from being dropped out from under 13s and 15 into universities. 90% of the times, in the young people who turns up at a street chance community session, they're gonna come there with their mates or by themselves. You will never see their parents. How many years I've been doing it, I've never seen one parent stand up. So that firstly opens a lot of can of worms. But some of the things they learn in those sessions is how to kind of, to manage themselves, how to look after themselves. They develop a winning culture. They develop stuff like, they're the better player there. So they bat a lot of times, they develop their fitness in terms of playing in a small space and their movements and coordination. And also, one of the big thing is is how they manage each other. So that's one of the big things I took from that. But to transit them into club and say maybe a emerging player or age group county squad stuff, that can be a little bit challenging because they're used to that environment where they're a family and they don't like to let anyone else in. So some of the methods I normally use is maybe start to take, because it's only tape ball we normally play and there's no structure session. It's basically you turn up and you play. So I would normally add maybe say one hardball session per month, and take my time gradually, introduce them to hardball cricket. Maybe organize a fixture with a mainstream club. Maybe sometimes I remember I used to take them down to the to the county with Barry, and they will mix along with the EPP boys and play a bit of tape ball match. And then we'll do stuff like maybe just have an open draft where whatever competition is going on at that time, whether it's the IPL, the PSL, or whatever, I would show some names in hats, and they will pick names from the hat, and then that eventually put people into different teams. And then that's where they meet people and they talk about the different environments. And this also opened up all the doors for the guys in the EPP setup to see a different way of training, a different way of thinking, and it just create that type of environment where people are beginning to start to think for themselves and manage themselves. Just like if you go back what Gooch says, when he started out, he didn't have a coach. So those are some of the ways to kind of embed them in that environment.
Thanks, Donny. That's brilliant. We're going to tap onto a bit more of the work you're doing in the last 5 years. But there's a few things I think I saw Graham nodding with Scotty around player-driven, player-focused, and you just touched on to around making sure the training is focused to help them develop and grow. And probably then go back to Graham. I touched on earlier on regarding, your methods were pioneering at the time when you were sort of playing and then going into a coach. But if I use a typical net scenario, how would that look from a player discussion from prior to the session to what may happen in the net?
I think whatever level you play, whether, as Donovan says, you're playing tape ball cricket, or you're playing for fun, or whether you want to aspire to a bit higher, when you're preparing and practicing and stuff, you've got to get the performers to enjoy themselves. Okay, that's a number one. They have to enjoy it. So when they go into the session and they compete, and when they come out, they've enjoyed it and they think it was worthwhile. Okay, because that's very important to stimulate them, because you're going to get more out of that performer the next time round if he's enjoyed the session. And to do that, I believe, obviously different with a different age and a different level of player, but the principles apply, that you've got to stimulate them. So for me, not having regulated practice, so it's the same every time, okay? Even if a player's working on a specific thing, obviously you put more at, not making any practice sessions too long, okay? And I think it's important, as you get to a better level of player, that you set a time for them, or in our case, when I started coaching with Essex and with England, we used to do it in overs, 6-ball overs, just like a game, okay? You do a number of overs, so say 15 overs, 20 overs, 45 minutes, an hour, that's a maximum. And the performer knows that that's his session. It's not just open-ended. It's not going to be aimless practice where it goes on unlimited. They have to get, boy or girl, or man or woman, have to get out of that in that time. And you've got to create an atmosphere where, if you want to challenge them, they're practicing their skills or whatever they need to practice, and you need to stimulate them. What I mean by stimulate, sometimes you can add some other things into it in between overs and different things which sort of take their mind off of the actual practice. Now, when I say take their minds, it means breaks their concentration a little bit. Because as we know, if you're a bowler in cricket or a batsman, concentration is vital. When I break down the things I used to talk about when I was coaching, number 1, attitude, number 2, technical ability, number 3, knowledge, number 4, concentration. Okay? So I won't go through them all in detail because it would take too long. But if you're a batsman or run maker, as I like to call them, okay, unless you can do the 4th one, concentrate, you can't score runs. It's impossible to score runs. Or should I say it's impossible to score runs that can influence a match, because you need to spend a length of time out in the middle. So when you practice, we used to do various physical exercises in between overs, make them run between the wickets, 2, 3, 1, run a 6, run a 8 even, and then they have to gather their thoughts, their composure to face the next over. So you try and break that concentration, which stimulates them a bit, because the danger is, as I say, is complacency. You just keep doing the same things and nothing improves. So all those little things can help. And one of the great things about practice, I think, is, I've written down, I think I told you earlier, Arfan, is that every time you go to practice, whatever level, whatever type of game, you want to come out a little bit better than you go in. That's the goal. And to do that, I think you've got to create good habits, okay? Good habits and bad habits. So when you're practicing, whatever you do, you want to have good habits. So if you're a batsman, you keep the ball on the ground, or you hit the ball out the ground. You don't hit it in the air, skim the ball in the air. And because the belief is that, maybe as a bowler, just think as a bowler, first ball, how many bowlers, all the people on this cast, okay, will, know the bowler, first ball they bowl, leg stump, half volley, as you said, okay? Nothing's more annoying for a captain than that, because you should have, started right on the mark. And you've got to create those good habits, because my belief is, if you have bad habits in practice, in preparation, you will take them to the middle for the game. There's no doubt about that. If you create yourself good habits, you will also take them to the middle as well. And, and therefore you will cut out the errors and you will have more success and therefore more enjoyment.
That's brilliant. And Graham, I might just push you. I mean, there's some brilliant insight and knowledge there. And I know personally I'll be going back on the recording and listening to that. But you touched on about, obviously, as from a coach perspective, an element of purpose in training. Can that also influence selection, or can that influence people, if you like, above who see people train the way they train, their processes in train when it comes to selecting?
I think if you show it, good aptitude and attitude in practice, that's going to probably impress the people who are going to make the selection. And I have to say, on a lighter note, I know a lot of captains in the county scene and England scene that if the bowler bowled well against them in the nets, that would have a bit of an influence on it, whether they got selected or not. I think so. And every bowler I played with, both internationally and, shall we say, for county, they upped their game when the captain was in the net. That's for sure. There's no doubt about that.
Mark, Chris, I think you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, getting on Graham's point, I have a squad of players that have different timetables. There's some that have a very crowded timetable, and there's some that have a very light timetable. And at Fenners, we have an indoor cricket school on site that's basically hours up till 6 o'clock when it goes out to clubs. But having said that, I much prefer working with the player that has that hour and a half in his schedule. And he comes because he's much more of a focused player. He comes in, he does his own preparation, he knows what he wants to work on. We've actually focused in that hour and a half or hour, and then he goes. That's opposed to others that I try and encourage them to go. Sometimes a player has his hour with me or whatever, and then 2 hours later they're in a net just bowling off spin and whacking it everywhere, and they're still there 2 or 3 hours later because they're enjoying it. And that's where the focus has gone, and that's where they're not, as Graham says, they're not improving, they're just having a bit of fun. So I much prefer working with that player, and they're adults now when they come to me. So it's not a case of juniors where they come and you tell them what to do for that whole hour. It evolves, but I much prefer that player who comes into the indoor school, gets his foam roller out, gets his TheraBand out, gets prepared because I may be working with somebody else. We go into a net and then they disappear for the rest of the day. I find that focused, whereas sometimes practice can get a little bit, people, sometimes less is more. Just goes long, and it just it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I might just tap onto that a little bit more. Graham and you both touched effectively on player focus, and as a coach, that sort of from having no coach to being, reliant on yourself as a young pro, then having a coach, probably the balance lost a little bit with the coaches dictating. How important is it now that a player comes with his or her thoughts prior to a session, rather than the coach sort of saying, well, I've watched you back the last 5 times. And I'll throw to Chris first, but I'd be really interested to all 3 colleagues on your comments on that. Chris, do you want to go first on that?
Yeah, I'll go first. Every session you do has to have structure, and if you're a coach, you do have your own opinions. And as I said at the start, if you're an experienced coach, where everybody is out there, that you soon realise why a player has got to that next level. You'll soon pick up clues. The first net, their physical attributes, their attitude. You soon realise, the counties aren't stupid. There is a reason you've not been taken on. So although I'm all for players sort of the discussion, what they want to work on, I don't think coaches should be shy in saying, if you want to get better, don't keep doing the same things. There are things that I can see, or a guest coach can see, that you really have to take on board, or otherwise you're just going to, the definition of madness, keep doing the same things and expect different results is going to happen. So, yeah, that's you get that with experience, I suppose.
Yeah, I'll go to Graham next, and then Donnie to wrap up that question. But your thoughts on that, Graham?
I'd rather have a performer who challenges me as a coach. It's a 2-way street, not a 1-way street. You can't be telling them all the time. They have got to come back to you with their ideas, because at the end of the day, it's their career, it's their enjoyment, whatever level they're going to play, and what they put into it is what they're going to get out of it, So if you have a player that comes back to you and discusses and debates their game or something relevant to them, however it is, whether it's technical, whether it's how they think about themselves, whether it's their fitness and whatever. That's what I think you want from a performer. You don't want them to say nothing. You want them to learn, you want them to listen, but then you want them to challenge you and debate it, because that's the way they're going to go forward. Because also, if they're strong enough and believe in themselves to speak up, I think that will reflect on how they're going to play as well. That's going to reflect on their confidence and belief that when they're in the game situation.
Brilliant. Donny?
I think for me, I'm going to agree with most of what Graham and Scott says there. I think it's important that you understand your players. You understand what they need, what they stand for. So when they come to you and ask for something, then you could, you have an idea if, how to go about it. I think it's important. But I would rather, as Graham says, that players that challenge what I'm doing and want to do things different and want to do things his way. Because if you go back to what Graham says at the start again, that's the player who wants to go out there in the middle and score a run. So if he wants his training to be structured a certain way, I think you have to be open to that. You have to be very open to that and making sure that you're giving him what he wants. As again, I keep using the word Graham says, again, we are like the affiliators who is there to kind of give them what they need. So it goes both ways. It might be a senior player, it might be a young player who's trying to find their way, but I think the key thing is just try and be open to everything.
Sorry, yes, please, Graham.
One thing, Donovan says, and Chris, you can't force a player to do anything he doesn't want to do. You can't force him to, okay? You can only give him what you think the benefit of your knowledge, your experience, your skills. His job is to put that into the jigsaw for his game. Some things will work for him or her, some things won't. But it's their job to structure that, in the end. You can't force them to do anything.
Pretty well said. Scott, you're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, it's a similar thing. I mean, we have an S&C session every once a week where the whole squad get together for strength and conditioning, and it's done by experts at the University Sports Centre. But I get given the slot that I'm given, and sometimes it's quite unsociable times. And last year I had an 8:30 on a Friday night, which is a bit of a graveyard. And you do find out about that player that once every three will find a reason not to be there, and as Graham said, you can't force it. If the player hasn't got that, and when they get to 18, 19, 20, then it's difficult to force that. You just hope the penny drops with encouragement. So, but you do find out those people that get on their bike, catch a bus, walk the last 20 yards to get there. That's when you find out about character.
Yeah, I'll come in. Sorry to keep butting in.
No, please.
But Chris is right. It depends on the player's expectation and his goal, where they want to go. Okay, ultimately, okay, how far they want to go. If they want to go to the right top, if they want to go to the top, you've got to make sacrifices. There is no shortcuts. Okay, there's no shortcuts to preparation, practice. Way you think about yourself, the fitness, the technique. If you want to get to the top, there is sacrifices to be made, and you're not going to make it unless you make those sacrifices. And some people are not prepared, or it's not in their DNA to do that, and they're probably unlikely to make it to the top. It's a simple choice.
Yeah, well said. Brilliant summary that as well. Donny, I'm going to come back to you, and definitely would love Chris and Graham's thoughts on this. I touched on in the introduction, you've now been working the last 5 or 6 years on global T20s as either head coach or assistant coach. We all know the pressures of performance. Both Chris and Graham have had years of results or developing a player. That constant sort of balance you got to do. From a global T20, you only turn up sometimes 2 weeks for a tournament. You've obviously drafted your squad. Some of the tournaments, domestic tournaments, also have local rules. I'll use the GT20 as an example last summer, where you got to have X amount of Canadian players. How important is it to nurture that 16, 17, 18-year-old player, as well as at the same time, focus on, your Chris Gales, your Andre Russells, your Shoaib Maliks, where you're trying to win a major tournament. As a coach, what's the balance? How do you balance it?
Well, the good thing about that is, as you said, you might go into a competition where you have 5 days, you might have 1 day to prepare. So as a coach, you probably would have done your homework before. It's reaching out to players, having those type of conversations early, especially your younger players. I think in terms of the senior players, because they have been in so many different changing rooms, and that's become now their job. They kind of understand most of the things to be get done already. So once you understand them, then it's all about making sure that you're giving that youngster as much attention as possible, and share that vice versa. So you can't basically throw him in the sea because he might drown. So you have to you want to put him in there, but you have to take your time and make sure that he goes in the sea. So one of the things I did is at every game day, I will spend 10 to 15 minutes extra with one of the youngsters who's in the team, whether it's fielding or throwing at the back or just mitting for him and talking through process. And training days, even if he's not playing, I might let him open the batting with whoever is his idol in the team. I might have that conversation with that senior player before. Said, look, young Tom is a massive fan of you, and he's a little bit starstruck. Can you guide him through these processes today at training? And those are some of the things I try to kind of implement in that type of structure. So one, you taking off that role off you and you put it onto the senior players, and two, you have to know the player again. Is he someone who is very quiet? Is he an introvert? Is he an extrovert? What does he like? And you're just making sure that you're looking after him all the way through and building up the confidence and making sure. So most of the times when I speak like in team meeting and I mention a player name, the work has already done at breakfast. I already have that conversation with the senior player. I already have that conversation with the youngster. So it's just nurturing them and making sure and guiding them and making sure that they feel comfortable in that environment.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Donny. And maybe throw that over to you as well, Graham, because obviously both with the Essex and England hat on, you're trying to develop the future Alistair Cook when he was 18, 19, but in the other net, you've got Bell and Strauss and others who you're trying to get them ready for an international series against India.
Well, I think in any walk of life, whether it's sport or cricket in our case, or as a manager or chief executive of an organisation, you got to get to know your people, isn't it? It's about man management. You've got to get to know, as Donovan says, what makes someone tick. Whether they need pushing all the time, whether they need the arm around the shoulder. It's important. I think in coaching, actually, it's very important, as Donovan has alluded to. You've got to build the trust, okay? So when you first see I don't do any coaching really now, but when you first see a player, it's a mistake to go straight up to them and start telling them, or giving them advice about their game. You've got to first try, and it must be difficult for Chris because he hasn't got probably the time with them, but you've got to try and get their trust, get their belief a bit before you start introducing lots of different things. Because one, I think as a coach, you need to see them perform a bit and see how they carry on, see how they handle themselves, what their attitude like, what's their temperaments like. And also you got to build the trust a little bit. You got to be a relationship. We've already mentioned about two-way relationship. You've got to get the relationship with them, and if they trust you, if they believe in you a bit, then the information you give to them, they're likely to follow it a little bit more.
That's brilliant. Chris, I'm going to kindly just slightly twist that question to you, just because we're running out of time and I want to get those couple of Q&As in as well. My question really to you is, you get this 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old who either has come from a county programme, come out of a county programme, still has ambitions and aspirations, and you've got three first class or 3 county games. How do you balance, using Donny's example about trying to gather information of an overseas pro or an England cricketer? Ian Bell's playing for Warwickshire and one of your batsmen scores a 30 and he's running up to Bell after the game. Is there a process or do you allow them just to ask him, how did I bat?
They are difficult times. I don't sort of dive in with opinions until I have seen that side. So quite often they're chucked in at the deep end. Suddenly you've worked with a lad who may have played for Hertfordshire under 17s the year before, and then I'm asking him in the first game of the season without any grass practice to play against Lancashire and Jimmy Anderson. You just try and go on what sort of attitude you've seen in the winter. You've just got to try and trust your gut instinct, and the people, you know, have the right sort of mentality and technique to cope with it. But, you know, try and get to them that, you know, that you play the ball, don't play the bowler. And, you know, anybody's good ball is still a good ball when you bowl it. It doesn't matter whoever bowls it. It's like if you bowl a good ball, it's still a good ball and might get somebody out. So I think mostly they relish the challenge, enjoy it, and they take it with them for the rest of their lives. But that's not to say I don't get it horribly wrong, because it is a little bit of a difficult selection, that first one of the season. Yeah, just well, you know more than anybody. So.
No comment. I'm going to throw quickly a couple of questions to the panel that have come up on the Q&A. I'll throw the first one probably to Chris, because you've done a bit of work with the university women's team as well as recreational, so you can probably better position. I think the principles actually might stay the same. How would you say is the best way to promote coaching to girls so they can get involved within our club? We struggle to bring in female players due to our coaching methods. That's an opinion from Peter, I should say.
That's to me.
Yes, please.
How can you encourage more people to coach girls and women?
Effectively girls, yeah. I think it was down to basically the coaching methods are probably driven towards boys cricket.
Well,
I
would give one word of advice out there to anybody who wants to go into coaching. Coach girls and women, because they actually listen, which is more than the boys and the men do. They actually love information. It's the most rewarding thing, actually, coaching the girls and the women, because they crave information, they crave answers, they hang on every word you say, whereas boys think most of the time you're talking a load of rubbish. So I would encourage it. Just digressing a little bit, sorry, I don't want to take too much time. When I came out of the county game, I had a bag of kit in my car, and I went round 4, 5, 6 primary schools a day, in schools with 30 in a class with a Christmas tree in a corner. That's where I cut my teeth in coaching, because I learned how to keep things moving, keep the structure, and keep it fun, and keep it moving and getting out there. And anybody that's got to go into coaching, do that, because you learn the fundamentals, and that still changes with senior players. They need a little bit of structure, and they also need you to keep things moving and keep things interesting. And but as I say, getting back to your point, I would encourage anybody to coach women and girls, because it's very rewarding, and anybody that's done that will tell you that.
Brilliant, that's a good answer as well. I'm going to throw the last one to Graham and Donny. You've all talked interestingly about players having to be motivated to train, learn. How do you handle those who are super keen, want to train, play every minute of the day, and in brackets, possibly also have parents who are pushing them to? This is particularly relevant for kids as they become old enough to play both junior and adult cricket. How do you deal with burnout? Graham, do you want to go first?
I'm trying to think of players that I've come across who do. I mean, there's a couple in fairly recent times. Obviously, when Ravi Bapara started, he'd be practicing every minute of the day. And I think you can overdo it, because you've got to have emphasis on quality, not quantity, to be honest. I don't mind people practicing more than once a day or whatever, but I would still, if possible, keep to the structure of a certain practice session, then go away, stop, and then come back, rather than just doing it, continually. Grant Flower was one of the only players I ever told when I was Essex coach, Grant, I want you to go over there, sit down and have a cup of tea, okay? Because this guy was practicing in the net, he was fielding, he was bowling, he was pushing weights, he was doing everything 24/7. And I just said, just have a cup of tea, go and have a beer or something after just sit down and do nothing. You need to rest as well. because I think you can overdo it. So again, you got to stress the quality. I mean, you don't want to dampen anyone's enthusiasm, that's for sure, because you want that. Because as I mentioned earlier, one of the most important things in any walk of life, you know, whether it's sport, cricket, is having the right attitude. You know, Chris has mentioned that, Donovan's mentioned that. The right attitude. If you've got the right attitude, you're keen to learn, you want to get on, you know. I mean, you know, I have coached you, so I can't really say this. I have coached you, but, you know, if a guy comes to me or a girl comes to me and says, Graham, I play a bit of cricket, okay? Can you help me do this, this, or this? I reckon I'm 50% there to helping them, okay? And I've never set eyes on them. I've never seen them play. And the reason is they want it. And that's important. They want it. Where, you know, whereas we've all seen the performer where you have to tap them on the shoulder and say, well, let's have a cup of coffee. Let's chat about this. Because they don't really get it. You know, they don't really understand how they need to get on, how they need to think about themselves. You have to keep pushing them all the time. Whereas the person who comes to you and wants that information, wants to glean information from you, you know, you've got a chance with them because they want it bad.
That's pretty good. Donnie, I was going to throw the same question at you, but if you're all right, because we're overrun, I'm going to ask one final different question. It's an easier one. Hopefully it's probably not, but it's just popped up. It's how to coach coping with nervousness, which is always in the game. So how do you manage nerves? You know, I've seen you operate prior to a match, but how do you manage nerves on players and performers?
That's a very, very good question, Arfan. But I think I'm gonna go back again where Graham says earlier. You want to create that environment where people are practicing and they're practicing with freedom and create those game situations. So whenever those moments come, even though it's different and there are crowds there, different, you want the players to feel like, well, I've done it in training. So the only thing you need to do now is try and maybe some players, when they're going out to perform, they don't want to be spoken to. So again, you have to understand that some people want to have a conversation. Some people can't sit down. All of these different things. But again, it still comes back to understanding that individual. Okay, some people you might have to, reinforce what the job is. Some people you might just have to leave them alone, and that's what it is. But if you create those good habits in practice, I think then that will help along the way.
That's brilliant. Actually, pretty well summed up. Can I just hugely thank Graham, Chris, and Donovan for your time, your insight, your knowledge. It's hugely appreciated. As I mentioned, this webinar is recorded, and I have a very good feeling that this is going to be watched over and over. So thank you so much.